So I remember there's a saying, a fear-driven religion is for those who are afraid to go to hell, whereas a more mature spirituality is for those who have already been there and back. So according to James Hollis, he has a book called Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life, from which I also base the workshop that I give for the CJCC. So he says that in the second half of life or in midlife, there are 3 tasks that we need to be mindful about. The first of which is the recovery of one's personal authority. So it means that, because as children and as we are growing older, it is a natural phenomenon for us to adapt to the world and its demands. So we're talking about the demands of our parents, the demands of our families, demands of when we go to school, the demands of society at large. But what happens is, in the process, as we adapt to the world, we develop what we refer to as the adaptive personality. But then, the adaptive personality is not necessarily authentic or real. And that is the reason why sometimes it's also called as the false self. So, one important thing we need to do in the second half of life is to be able to, because in the process of adapting, we relinquish our personal authority. So what we need to do in the second half of life is to claim that back, that authority and that power to be able to conduct our lives the way we want to. So that's the first task. Now the second task is all about balancing our obligations between people and between people and ourselves. I think that's quite self-explanatory, diba? Because I think in the process of fulfilling our obligations to the world or fulfilling our obligations to the people around us, we may have a tendency to compromise our obligation to ourselves, which according to Jung is that lifelong process of becoming more and more the persons we are meant to be, which he refers to as the process of individuation. So some depth practitioners would refer to it as self-actualization, which is basically realizing and expressing ourselves, our more authentic and real selves over time. And the third and last task is developing a more mature spirituality. So, again, I think for most of us, a religion or its traditions, spiritual or religious practices, is something that we inherit in our families. We are born to a religion, and therefore, it's something that it's not of our own choosing. But developing a more mature spirituality basically means validating it with our very personal experiences. Because what is experientially true is the one that will enlarge us at the end of the day. So there's also the issue of how does spirituality differ from religion? Diba? There's religion versus spirituality. Those are two different things. I think religion, for the most part, is based on fear. And when I say fear, I'm talking about fear of being punished, fear of punishment, or fear of losing the approval of your religious group. But when we say a more mature spirituality, we're talking about connecting to something more authentic and real as we experience our religion and spirituality. So I remember there's a saying, a fear-driven religion is for those who are afraid to go to hell, whereas a more mature spirituality is for those who have already been there and back. So there's a Jungian analyst by the name of James Hollis, who also did extensive work on midlife and the second half of life. And he said that basically the single most important task in the second half of life is to live it more consciously. So we talk a lot about the unconscious in Jungian psychology, which, so remember that analogy of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is what we're conscious about ourselves, and that part of the iceberg that is submerged in water, that huge amount of iceberg that is submerged in water, is the unconscious. So I also believe we cannot be fully conscious. We cannot totally know about the unconscious in just one lifetime. But that should not prevent us from going through the process of getting to know ourselves better, or getting to know the unconscious better. And that goes both informal, and when I say formal, that is what we try to work on in therapy. There's such a framework of therapy we call psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is really all about making the unconscious more conscious. So that goes for all the defense mechanisms. When we say defense mechanisms, we're talking about our ways of coping with life. Because we can go through life unconsciously, diba? Or semi-consciously, if you want to put it that way. So what's important is for us to be a little more conscious over time. Of course, theoretically, they're all important. No? But in my clinical practice, I guess it's 1 and 2. Kasi nga externally directed yun eh. 1 being recovering one's personal authority, and the second is balancing our obligation between ourselves and other people, which is a very practical issue in our everyday life. Because life is really about striking a balance at the end of the day among all of these things. And in fact, a lot of for the most part, people come to me if they're not clinically ill because there's a certain imbalance in their lives. That's one important aspect we focus on in psychotherapy. What are those aspects that you have neglected in exchange of focusing on just this one aspect? And a lot of the times, it's romantic relationships.
That's why there's a lot of parang new loves coming out at age of midlife crisis.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, parang you invest and focus a lot, or you're all in a romantic relationship to the exclusion of the other aspects of your life. And what happens if that ends, or when it ends? Diba? You are left with a big void because you have neglected the other aspects of your life.